After September 11, 2001, the US declared the global war on terrorism. Less than 3 years later, they announced the first victory in this war in Afghanistan, of all places. That shouldn't be the only catastrophic misjudgment. US President George W. Bush wanted to redeem the nation from its numbness when he spoke to Congress 9 days after September 11 and those attacks. He said, "Our grief has turned into anger, and our anger has turned into determination. And our war on terror starts with Al Qaeda, but it doesn't end there. It will only end when every terrorist group with global reach has been found, stopped, and defeated." Even 20 years later, there cannot be talk of an end of the international terrorist threat. And on the first battlefield in this war, Afghanistan, the West has just failed. After the Taliban refused to extradite Al-Qaeda chief Osama bin Laden, the US-led attack on Afghanistan began on October 7th in 2001. Bush made it clear at the time that the US's fight is also expressly directed against those governments that offer protection to terrorists. The Taliban regime fell at the end of 2001, and for a while it appeared that Afghanistan was on the right track. During a visit by Afghan interim President Hamid Karzai to the White House in June 2004, Bush spoke of the first victory in the war on terror. It was one of many catastrophic misconceptions by the United States. At the latest, the withdrawal plans of US President Donald Trump and his successor Joe Biden set a momentum in motion in Afghanistan that led to the Taliban regaining power. Originally, Biden had announced that the US troop withdrawal would be completed by September 11th of this year. On the 20th anniversary of the attacks, the white flag of the Islamists is flying again in Kabul now. The NATO-led troops have withdrawn in chaos. The Afghan security forces have collapsed. The Taliban won the war in Afghanistan. Biden argues that the mission's most important objective was achieved nonetheless. Back in May 2011, when US Special Forces killed Al-Qaeda chief Osama bin Laden in Pakistan. It's true that the US has never been a target of a comparable terrorist attack since September 11th, but the danger is not over. In their latest threat report, the US intelligence services, the Islamic State terrorist militia Al-Qaeda and Iran with its militant allies continue to plan terrorist attacks against the people and interests of the US, including to varying degrees in the United States, they say. According to the United Nations, Al-Qaeda was already present in almost every second Afghan province before the withdrawal of international troops. A report by the US Security Council in spring said, "The Taliban are still closely associated with Al-Qaeda and show no signs of a break in relations." It's not surprising that Al-Qaeda is celebrating the withdrawal of the West from Afghanistan as a triumph. They wrote, "God promised us victory and Bush the defeat," the terror network recently announced. And the Afghan debacle of America and NATO marks the beginning of the end of a dark era of Western domination and military occupation of Islamic countries. Indeed, this Afghan debacle could lead to a fundamental rethink in Washington as well. "We have to learn from our mistakes," said Biden after the end of the mission. "This decision on Afghanistan is not just about Afghanistan, it's about ending an era of great military operations to transform other countries. The creation of democratic structures cannot be the goal of anti-terrorism operations." Biden argues that the fight against terrorism does not require American ground troops to be stationed in distant countries. Other means, such as drones, have already proven themselves for this purpose. It was not only in Afghanistan that it became apparent that a large-scale deployment of ground troops is more difficult to end than it is to begin. Bush also used the war on terrorism as an excuse to attack Iraq in March 2003. At the end of 2011, the US withdrew its troops from the country, and less than 3 years later, they had to return to support the Iraqi security forces in the fight against IS. Despite its military defeat, the terrorist militia is still active in Iraq and neighboring Syria. In Afghanistan too, the US troops supported the local security forces, and other parallel can be seen in Iraq. A functioning democracy, as the USA wanted to establish in the country after its 2003 invasion of Iraq, never came into being there. There are indeed elections to parliament, but they do little to change the real balance of power. The country's politics are characterized by mismanagement and corruption. The country's weak infrastructure is an example for this. While Iraq is one of the most oil-rich countries in the world, the people there permanently suffer from a lack of electricity. So many Iraqis are frustrated with their ruling class that voter turnout fell to an all-time low in 2018. Later, young men and women in particular took to the streets to take part in mass protests against which the security forces used violence. Big mistake. Above all, the US military operation in Iraq, with the overthrow of long-term ruler Saddam Hussein, opened the door to massive influence from Shiite neighbor Iran. The Shiite Muslims not only make up the majority in Iraq, they also dominate politics. Tehran mainly uses Shiite militias to assert its interests. These armed groups are not only militarily strong, but also closely linked to important political parties. IS also used the political chaos in Iraq to bring large parts of the country under control in 2014. And last but not least, there were many Sunnis among his ranks who had previously served in Saddam's army. When the US disbanded the military after his overthrow, many soldiers felt humiliated and sought revenge. There is growing pressure on the USA to withdraw its soldiers from Iraq as well. In the past few months, there have been repeated rocket attacks on facilities used by the Americans. Washington sees Shiite militias at work there. But a withdrawal will have far-reaching consequences. Iran will then take over Iraq, predicts Guido Steinberg, Iraq expert at the Science and Politics Foundation in Berlin. And the IS should also see itself on the upswing. That would be even more true if the Biden administration were to also complete the withdrawal from Syria that Trump had begun. There, the US troops supported the Kurds in the fight against IS. Without Washington's help, it would be hard to imagine that they could hold the territories they control in northern and eastern Syria. And I'll see you in my next video. Bis gleich.